The rain hammered against the reinforced glass of the VIP suite on the top floor of St. Jude's Hospital, a relentless rhythm that matched the chaotic noise inside Junho's mind. He stood with his back to the room, staring out at the city's skyline. A city he practically owned, a city where his word was law and his wrath was legendary. But here, in this sterile, white-walled purgatory, the dragon of the East Side was nothing more than a frightened child. Behind him, the rhythmic beeping of cardiac monitors was the only proof that his parents were still technically alive. It had been 6 months since the car accident, a twisted wreck of metal and shattered glass that the police had labeled a tragic mishap, while Junho knew it was a message from his rivals. He had decimated the clan responsible within a week, leaving nothing but ash in his wake, but vengeance had not woken his mother. Retribution had not healed his father's shattered spine or the swelling in his brain. The best neurologists in the country, men and women Junho had flown in on private jets and paid millions, had all eventually offered the same sympathetic, useless shrugs. They spoke of persistent vegetative states and quality of life, euphemisms that tasted like bile in Junho's throat. He turned slowly, his sharp, angular face drawn and pale, dark circles bruising the skin beneath his eyes. He looked at the two beds. His father, once a mountain of a man who could silence a room with a glance, looked small and withered beneath the thin hospital sheets. His mother, the woman who had sung him to sleep even when they were poor and starving, was a ghost, her face obscured by tubes and tape. The anger that usually fueled him had burned down to a pile of cold, gray ash. He felt hollow. Earlier that morning, the chief of medicine had suggested moving them to a long-term hospice facility, a polite way of telling Junho to give up and let them die. He had nearly thrown the man through the window, but now, alone in the dim light, the crushing weight of reality was settling in. He walked to the space between their beds and sank into the leather chair that had become his home. He rested his forehead in his hands. He was the most powerful man in the criminal underworld, yet he could not command their eyes to open. He could not bribe death to look away. For the first time in his life, Junho was ready to accept defeat, his heart fracturing under the silence of the room. The elevator doors at the end of the exclusive corridor slid open with a soft chime, a sound that usually signaled the arrival of terrified doctors or trembling nurses who did their jobs quickly to avoid the gaze of the bodyguards stationed outside. But the footsteps that followed were different, steady, rhythmic, and unafraid. Keisha adjusted the ID badge clipped to her dark green scrubs, taking a deep breath as she stepped onto the floor. She was 24, fresh in this specific wing, but seasoned by a life that had forced her to grow up too fast. She had been warned about the occupant of room 404. The other nurses whispered about him in the break room, calling him a monster, a gangster, a man who had made a nurse cry just by looking at her. They said the energy in the room was so dark it felt like walking into a grave. But Keisha didn't believe in monsters, only broken people, and she knew that grief often wore the mask of rage. She carried a clipboard in one hand and a small, portable speaker in the other, her dark curls pulled back in a practical, neat bun. As she approached the double doors, two massive men in black suits stepped in front of her, blocking the path like stone pillars. They didn't speak, they just stared down at her, expecting her to shrink away like the others. Keisha didn't flinch. She looked the larger one in the eye, her expression calm and warm. "I'm Keisha, the new night shift nurse," she said, her voice soft but firm, carrying a melody of confidence. "I need to check their vitals and change the 4 bags. Unless you have medical degrees hidden under those jackets, you're going to need to let me pass." The guard blinked, clearly taken aback by her lack of fear. He glanced at the camera above the door, then back at her. After a long, tense moment, he stepped aside. Keisha nodded her thanks, not mockingly, but with genuine respect, and pushed the heavy door open. The air inside was freezing, the thermostat set low enough to preserve meat. In the corner, she saw him, Junho, shrouded in shadow, watching her with eyes that looked like shattered obsidian. He didn't speak. He just watched, waiting for her to make a mistake, waiting for her to tremble. Keisha met his gaze, offered a small, sad smile, and walked straight to his mother's bedside. "Good evening, Mrs. Park," she said aloud to the comatose woman, her voice filling the oppressive silence. My name is Keisha. I'll be taking care of you tonight. Let's get you comfortable. Jun-ho watched the new nurse with a mixture of irritation and bewilderment. Usually, the staff moved like ghosts, touching his parents only when necessary, their hands shaking, their eyes averted. They treated his parents like broken machinery, tasks to be completed before fleeing his presence. But this woman, this girl, really was different. She moved with a fluid grace, her dark green scrubs rustling softly as she worked. She didn't just check the monitors. She adjusted the pillows. She didn't just change the four. She smoothed the hair back from his mother's forehead. And she kept talking. She narrated everything she was doing, not to him, but to them. She told his father about the rain outside, describing how the city lights looked reflected in the puddles. She told his mother that her skin was looking better today. It was ridiculous. It was a performance, Jun-ho decided. She was trying to curry favor with the boss, trying to secure a tip or protection. The cynicism that had been his shield for years rose up, hard and sharp. "Stop it," Jun-ho said, his voice a low rasp that usually made men wet themselves. He didn't stand up, he didn't have to. The menace radiated off him in waves. Keisha paused, her hand resting gently on his father's shoulder. She turned to look at him, her expression unreadable. "Stop what, sir?" she asked, her tone polite but devoid of the trembling fear he was used to. "Talking to them." Jun-ho spat, leaning forward into the light. "They aren't listening. They aren't there. They are husks. Do your job, check the machines, and be quiet. I don't pay you to pretend." The room seemed to grow colder. Most people would have apologized and scurried away. Keisha didn't. She turned fully toward him, her hands clasping together in front of her green scrubs. "With all due respect," she said, her voice dropping to a whisper that felt intimate, like a secret shared between friends, "you don't know that. The hearing is often the last thing to go, and the first thing to come back. They might be far away, but they aren't gone. And as long as I am in this room, I will treat them like the human beings they are, not the furniture you seem to think they've become." Jun-ho was struck silent, his mouth slightly open. No one spoke to him like that. No one dared. But in her eyes, he didn't see defiance. He saw a profound, aching sadness that mirrored his own. The nights turned into a week, and the strange tension between the Mafia boss and the nurse began to shift into something unrecognizable. Jun-ho found himself waiting for the ding of the elevator, waiting for the flash of dark green scrubs. He stopped brooding in the corner and began to sit closer to the beds as she worked. Keisha brought life into the mausoleum. One night, she brought in a bottle of jasmine essential oil. "Scent is a powerful memory trigger," she explained softly, dabbing a little on his mother's wrists. "Does she like jasmine?" Jun-ho looked at the small bottle, a sudden, sharp memory piercing his heart. He remembered his mother in their tiny kitchen, the smell of jasmine tea brewing, the only luxury she allowed herself. "Yes," Jun-ho whispered, his voice cracking. "She used to drink jasmine tea." Every Sunday, Keisha smiled, a genuine, radiant expression that made the room feel warmer. "Then she knows you're here," she said. Later that night, while the rain continued to drizzle outside, Jun-ho asked the question that had been plaguing him. "Why?" he asked, looking at Keisha as she checked the oxygen levels. "Why do you care? You don't know us. You know who I am. You know what I do. Why treat them with such love?" Keisha paused, looking down at his father's hand. She took a breath, and for the first time, her professional mask slipped, revealing a young woman who had seen too much pain. "Because I know what it's like to be in that bed," she said quietly. "My brother. He was in a coma for 2 years. Gunshot wound. Wrong place, wrong time." She looked up at Jun-ho, her eyes shimmering with unshed tears. "Everyone gave up on him. The doctors, the nurses, even my parents started to let go. But I talked to him every day. I sang to him. I told him about my day. And one day, he woke up. He told me he heard me. He said my voice was the rope that pulled him back from the dark." She reached out and gently touched Jun-ho's clenched fist. "Your parents are lost in a dark wood, Jun-ho. They need a light to find their way back. You have to be that light. You can't just be the darkness anymore." The storm that hit the city on the 10th night was historic. Thunder rattled the window panes, and the lights in the hospital flickered ominously before the backup generators kicked in with a low hum. The atmosphere in the room was electric, heavy with the pressure of the storm. Junho was pacing, his anxiety spiking with every crash of thunder. He felt a terrifying certainty that tonight was the end, that the storm had come to claim them. Keisha was calm, moving between the beds, checking the monitors which were beeping erratically due to the power fluctuations. "It's okay," she soothed, her voice a calm anchor in the chaos. "It's just a storm. We're safe." She pulled out her phone and connected it to the small speaker she always brought. "I looked this up," she said softly to Junho. "I hope it's right." A soft, mournful melody began to play. It was an old Korean folk song, Erarang. It was the song Junho's mother had hummed to him when he was sick, the song she sang when she thought no one was listening. The sound of the familiar, haunting notes cut through the noise of the thunder. Keisha began to hum along, her voice rich and soulful, blending with the recording. She took the mother's hand in hers and gestured for Junho to take his mother's other hand. He hesitated, his heart pounding against his ribs like a trapped bird. His hand, which had held guns, knives, and the fate of men, trembled as he reached out. When his skin brushed against his mother's papery, cool flesh, a shockwave went through him. It was the first time he had touched her with genuine tenderness since the accident, not just a cursory check for warmth, but a desperate, clinging grasp. Keisha nodded at him, her eyes urging him on. "Sing," she mouthed. "She needs to hear her son." Junho swallowed the lump of concrete in his throat. He opened his mouth, but no sound came out at first. He tried again, forcing the air from his lungs, and a cracked, broken sound emerged. He began to hum the melody, the vibration feeling foreign in his chest. Slowly, the hum turned into words. "Erarang, Erarang, Arario," he sang softly, his voice rough with disuse and emotion. As he sang, the memories flooded him. Not the blood and the money, but the smell of sesame oil, the scratch of his mother's wool sweater, the sound of her laughter before the world turned cold. He squeezed her hand, pouring every ounce of his regret, his love, and his desperate hope into that grip. And then he felt it. It was faint, so faint he thought he imagined it, a flutter against his palm, a twitch of a finger. He froze, his singing cutting off abruptly. He looked at Keisha, his eyes wide with panic and hope. "Did you see that?" he whispered. Keisha was already moving, her eyes scanning the monitors, her hand checking the pulse at his mother's neck. She didn't dismiss him. She didn't tell him it was a spasm. She looked at him with a fierce intensity. "Keep singing, Junho," she commanded, using his name for the first time without an honorific. "Don't stop. She's fighting. Help her fight." The storm outside intensified, a jagged bolt of lightning illuminating the room in a stark, blue-white flash that was immediately followed by a crack of thunder so loud it shook the floorboards. The lights in the room flickered violently, dimmed to a brown haze, and then died completely. For a terrifying second, the room was plunged into absolute darkness, the only sound the wind howling against the glass. Then, the red emergency lights bathed the room in a bloody glow, and the backup batteries on the ventilators kicked in with a high-pitched whine. The rhythmic beeping of his father's heart monitor faltered, the steady tempo becoming erratic. Junho sprang up, the chair clattering behind him. "What's happening?" he roared, the fear transmuting instantly into aggression. "Fix it. Why are the machines doing that?" He looked ready to tear the walls down with his bare hands. Keisha didn't flinch. In the red light, she looked like a soldier in the trenches. She moved instantly to his father's side, her fingers flying over the controls of the ventilator, checking the connections. "The power surge disrupted the sensor calibration," she said, her voice loud and clear, cutting through his panic. "He's not crashing. The machine is just resetting. I need you to stay calm," but Junho couldn't stay calm. He watched the numbers on the screen fluctuate wildly. He grabbed his phone, ready to call the hospital director, ready to threaten, to bribe, to kill anyone who let the power fail. "Put the phone away," Keisha ordered, not looking up from her work. "You can't buy electricity, and screaming won't stabilize his heart rate. Your anxiety is filling the room. They can feel it. If you want to help, stand there, hold his hand, and be the anchor he needs." Be a son, not a boss. Junho stared at her, his phone gripping tightly in his hand. The red light cast deep shadows on his face. He was the dragon. He gave orders. He did not take them. But looking at Keisha, seeing the sweat on her brow and the steady confidence of her hands, he realized his power was useless here. He slowly lowered the phone. He walked to his father's side, opposite Keisha, and placed his hand on his father's chest. He could feel the heart beating, irregular but there. He closed his eyes and breathed, forcing his own heart to slow, willing his strength into the frail body beneath his hand. An hour later, the main power had returned, the harsh fluorescent lights replaced once again by the soft, dim glow of the bedside lamps. The crisis had passed, but the adrenaline still hummed in the air. Junho sat on the floor between the two beds, his expensive Italian suit jacket discarded on a chair, his tie loosened. He looked younger like this, stripped of his armor. Keisha sat in the chair he usually occupied, watching him. She had saved them tonight, not with medicine, but with presence. I built all of this, Junho said quietly, staring at his hands. The empire, the reputation, the fear. I did it so no one could ever touch them. So they would have the best doctors, the best food, the safest home. He let out a bitter, dry laugh. And look at them. I can't protect them from a wet road. I can't protect them from a storm. I am the most powerful man in the city, and I am useless. He looked up at Keisha, his eyes red-rimmed. You have nothing. You take the bus here. You wear scrubs. And yet, you have more power in your little finger than I have in my entire organization. Keisha leaned forward, resting her elbows on her knees. Power isn't about control, Junho, she said softly. It's about connection. You built walls to keep the world out, but you locked yourself in. You locked them in, she gestured to his parents. They don't need the dragon. They don't need the money. They need the boy who likes jasmine tea. They need the son who knows the words to Ararang. You've been grieving them while they're still here. You already buried them in your heart because it was easier than hoping. Junho listened, the truth of her words cutting deeper than any knife. He realized he had been angry at them for dying, angry at them for leaving him alone, even though they hadn't left yet. He had been mourning his own abandonment. I don't know how to be that boy anymore, he whispered. He's gone, Keisha smiled, a soft, knowing expression. No, he's not. I heard him singing earlier. He's just been quiet for a long time. The morning sun broke through the heavy clouds, casting a pale, golden light across the city. The storm had washed the skyline clean, leaving the glass towers sparkling. Inside room 404, the atmosphere had shifted. It was no longer a waiting room for death. It was a room of recovery. Junho had fallen asleep sitting on the floor, his head resting on the mattress of his mother's bed. Keisha was finishing her shift, tidying up the medical supplies, her movements slow with exhaustion. She walked over to check the mother's vitals one last time before the day shift arrived. As she leaned over to adjust the blanket, she saw it. The mother's eyelids fluttered. It wasn't the twitch from before. It was a deliberate struggle against the weight of sleep. Keisha froze, her breath catching. Junho, she whispered. He didn't stir. Junho, wake up. She shook his shoulder gently. He jerked awake, instantly alert, his hand reaching for a weapon that wasn't there. What? What is it? He scrambled up, looking at the monitors. Look, Keisha said, pointing to his mother's face. Junho leaned in, his breath trembling. Yama, he whispered. Slowly, agonizingly, the eyelids lifted. The eyes that looked back were unfocused, cloudy with months of darkness, but they were open. They roamed the room blindly for a moment before settling on the face hovering above her. A small, weak sound escaped her throat. It was a groan, but to Junho, it was a symphony. Tears instantly spilled from his eyes, hot and fast. I'm here, he sobbed, grabbing her hand and pressing it to his cheek. I'm here, Yama. It's Junho, her fingers curled weakly against his face. Across the room, the father let out a deep sigh, his head turning slightly on the pillow toward the sound of his wife's voice. He wasn't awake yet, but the connection between them was pulling him back too. The doctor, who had just walked in for rounds, dropped his clipboard. Impossible, he muttered. Keisha stood back against the wall, tears streaming down her own face, a silent witness to the miracle she had helped engineer. 3 weeks later, the hospital corridor was bright and busy. Junho stood by the nurse's station, but he didn't look like the man who had haunted the halls a month ago. He was wearing a simple gray sweater and dark jeans. The dark circles under his eyes were fading. His parents were both awake, weak, facing a long road of physical therapy, but awake. They were talking. They were eating. They were alive. He saw Keisha coming down the hall, starting her shift. She looked tired but smiled when she saw him. He walked up to her, blocking her path, but this time there were no bodyguards, no intimidation. He held out a thick white envelope. "I know you said you didn't want anything," Junho said, his voice steady and humble. "But this isn't a bribe. It's a scholarship fund. For your brother. For you. For whatever you want to do." Keisha looked at the envelope, then up at his face. She gently pushed his hand back. "I told you, Junho. I didn't do it for the money." He looked at her, desperate to give her something, to balance the scales. "Then what?" he asked. "You gave me my life back. You saved my soul. How do I repay that?" Keisha adjusted her bag on her shoulder. She looked at him with that same piercing, honest gaze that had disarmed him the first night. "You repay it by changing," she said. "You repay it by being the man your mother sees when she looks at you. Don't go back to the darkness. Junho, you saw the light. Stay in it." She patted his arm, a friendly, casual gesture that bridged the gap between their worlds. "Go take care of your parents. They're asking for jasmine tea." She walked past him, the doors swinging shut behind her. Junho stood there for a long moment, clutching the envelope.